All right, let's get together with the Airport Board meeting for March 29, 2022. Remember, the mission of the Great Falls International Airport Authority is to optimize transportation services and development in our region, and our vision is to maximize the airport's benefit to the region. So, remember, we appreciate, welcome, and please remember the board appreciates participation from the public. And if you have any comments throughout the meeting, please stand, state your name, address, and your comments will be heard. With that, I'll call the meeting to order with the quorum present. Roll call. Commissioner Eritz. Here. Commissioner Baki's here. Commissioner Gibbs. Here. Commissioner Lalonde. Here. Commissioner Hoban. Here. Commissioner Smith. Here. Commissioner Timbo. Here. We have everybody. Let's start with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, we'll start off with the consent agenda, being made up of routine day-to-day items that require board action but do not appear to have a significant public impact. Items may be pulled from the consent agenda for separate discussion vote by any member of the board. Item A, approval of board meeting minutes from February 22nd, 2022. B, payroll checks totaling $106,500.60. Maintenance and operation checks number 26608 through 26670 totaling $327,807.44. D, approved passenger facility charge totaling $32,642.72. And E, financial reports for February 2022. Would any member like to pull any of those items for separate discussion? All right, and with that, do I have a motion? To accept the consent agenda as stated. Do I have a second? Second. All right, with a motion and a second, any further discussion? All right, all in favor of accepting the consent agenda as stated, say aye. 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 Opposed? Consent agenda passes. All right, moving on to the director's report.
Yes, happy March, everybody. A couple things to mention. You probably saw the press releases last week. United has a number of schedule changes coming up. They'll be flying Chicago flights every Saturday starting April 4th. No, not April, June 4th. And extending through the Labor Day weekend. We'll also be upgrading to an Airbus on the Denver route. So we'll have 2 flights a day. The first on the first on a 50-seater, and then the Airbus does a turn midday, and then we get the 50-seater back in that night. And so that's about a 20% increase in schedule for United over 2019, which is really going to help us out some. Delta will start a 3rd Salt Lake for the summer also in June. But obviously that's a reduction in capacity from where they would be 2019 and other years when they had Minneapolis running. Yeah, Alaska will run their 2-flight-a-day schedule. At least that's what they're telling us right now. The 2nd flight will start in June also. So we'll be a couple of months between now and then. They're going to be very capacity constrained. You probably saw the announcement on Friday that they're getting rid of their Q400s on a pretty rapid schedule. So we're not certain how that's going to impact us. We did get an email from them Saturday just indicating that they'll be looking at markets either to go to an ERJ or a mainline 7.3. So we'll probably know more over the next month or so, or maybe 2 months, about how that fleet change is going to happen. They had changed to an ERJ in this market some years ago. Like all of Montana had changed to ERJs. That change only stuck around for a few months, and they were back to Q400. So I would hope we'll go back to the ERJ. Although by the time we get to fall, I would hope we could fill potentially a 737 daily. That'd be nice to see that 1 flight a day that we normally get switch over to a larger plane. So we'll have more discussions with them. I'm actually weighing. I was going to skip Jumpstart this year, which is the next airline conference. It's in June, but given that I may and SCASD might come out in that same time frame, I may decide to go down and go to that air conference so I could talk to our SCASD targets if we know we have a grant in hand, and also follow up with Alaska on what their plans are for fall. once we get through that Q400 schedule. So some changes coming up there. Allegiant, you probably saw, they're discontinuing Phoenix flying pretty much at the end of next month. And then they won't bring that back until, I believe it's 1st of October, that flight comes back. The last couple of years, they've been reducing Phoenix out of the schedule for months or 6 weeks at a time. This time they're going for a little broader reduction. That's all due to the pilot shortage. I talked to them a couple weeks ago about some of those changes. And they're, like everyone, struggling to have pilots. They actually had to cancel a flight last week because they didn't have a pilot to pick up the flight. So they continue to struggle with pilot shortages like everyone else. They will continue flying Vegas throughout the summer, but only on that 2-week schedule. So pretty slow summer for Allegiant. Those are the only schedule changes we know of at this point for the airlines. Last time I had talked to Delta, there was still an outside chance we would see Minneapolis in July, but I think that's probably not going to happen at this point. So probably count that one out. Update on FedEx. We've exchanged some comments with them. Their legal department sent a few updates on the contract, which is a good sign. We're hopeful that we're going to finish that up here in the next month or two to complete that next long-term agreement with them. They remain happy with the offer we're making to extend that contract. Everything still looks good. It's just a matter of getting them to finalize the deal. I think the most likely scenario at this point, for those of you who remember what we had offered them, is that we'll be self-financing the building for them. So essentially we'll be carrying the note on the building, and at any time they can buy us out. I think the interest rate on that is 6%, so it's not particularly attractive for them. For us, it's great, but it still does allow their rent to go down substantially once they get that new agreement signed, which is good. The building paid off 1.5 years ago, so there isn't any debt anymore to be repaid. So we had always envisioned we would step the rent down once the building was completely paid off, and we're kind of there. We just need to get FedEx to get the deal done. Let's see, other things on the director's report. We need to schedule our annual budget meeting with the Finance Committee, Budget and Finance Committee. We'll be reaching out to everybody to do that. Mr. Chairman, I don't know if you have any interest in reappointing people to that. It's your one superpower, or you can appoint anyone to a committee.
Well, we currently have, who are our 3 point guys? 1, 2, any desire to continue or not continue? Continue?
Yeah, unless somebody else wants to.
Are you interested, Todd?
I'm good with those guys continuing.
We'll go with the current appointees to extend.
All right, so we'll reach out to those 3 for the scheduled meeting in April, and then we'll come to the board at the May meeting with a proposed budget. And then if we have to make any adjustments, we'll be back in June. But we would bring the committee meeting notes to the April meeting, and then final budget to the May meeting, if that works. And then, like I said, depending on how the year ends up, anything needs to be changed, we'll come back in June and modify that before we start the year. But that'll be our schedule. And then lastly, we have the open house for TSA on the 31st. That's when the vendors that are interested in doing private screening will be here for a tour of the airport and to meet with TSA. So that's coming up this week also.
John, how many do you anticipate coming?
I've heard 4. Now, I don't have any way to confirm that, but I just in talking to TSA, they thought there would be 4 here. So yeah, and that's all I have.
While we're on that discussion, the air show this summer at the Guard unit, is there any involvement by the airport other than, and is all of the displays going to be over on the Guard ramp?
Yeah, they want to be on the Guard ramp as I think almost exclusively this time, except for I think that some of the flying acts will probably, the private guys will probably be down here. That's typically what happens. But I think they're making an effort this year to have all the military guys on the ramp over there since they have that expanded ramp. So it won't impact the terminal ramp any, and we'll be under construction most likely by then anyway. Hopefully the taxiway will be open. We're going to go through a period in there where taxiway A is going to have to be closed to accommodate some construction, but it's hard to say when we'll finally have our funding in place to initiate that project, assuming we get through the board and all the grants come through. So it's possible we might not even be in a closure by then. So, but yeah, we do have that. And that Friday, typically we've had a picnic for board and staff on that Friday of the air show, kind of a late afternoon, so we can watch the JetX do their thing. So if you want to plan that, do you know that date, Laura?
23rd and 24th.
Say again?
Saturday is the 23rd.
23rd is Saturday.
July, right?
So it would be the 22nd then. So the July 22nd, and you're welcome to bring kids. We'll cook out and sit outside in the shade of the snow building and watch the planes, which is always kind of fun.
Yeah. Barbecue at the SRE building.
Absolutely,
It's always good.
yeah. Bring your earplugs.
Hopefully there won't be any snow.
And so yeah, we typically have some involvement with the tower in trying to schedule the acts around commercial flying and that kind of thing. And then of course, you know, the day of the event, the days of the event, we're usually up here. I mean, crazy things happen, tents blow out onto the airfield and, you know, that kind of stuff. But for the most part, the Guard does a really good job of managing the event. It's likely we will lease them that big field between the SRE and the Guard on some type of operating agreement so that they can do law enforcement, because they're not allowed to do law enforcement off their property as a Guard unit. So if we can lease them that property, Scott, you can grab a chair here.
Oh, that's all right.
But if we can lease them the property, it makes it easier for them to enforce, you know, liquor in the parking lot and that kind of stuff. So we'll look to do that.
And still parking out in that big field out there.
That's the plan. When they did their ramp project, actually, Scott and those guys beat a pretty good path down through that field all the way to the Guard apron now. So we have a pretty good sized road through there. I don't know if anyone drove that in the past, but we would get cars stuck. Low clearance cars would get stuck in some of the chuck holes out there. So now that we have that pretty good road, I think that's going to make it a lot easier to get cars in and out of that field for the air show. 2 years ago, or last 2 air shows ago, we actually had to overflow across the street into some of the fields along the highway. But this last time, it seemed like there was plenty of parking. So hopefully we won't have to overflow. But yeah, that'll be where the parking is.
And we're not involved in any of the advertising or anything for that?
No, the Guard gets sponsors for all that, so we really don't have to do a ton of prep work getting that all together. We will have to coordinate with them on, they want to burn the fields down and stuff around ahead of time because they're planning some pyro and obviously that's a fire danger, particularly in July. So we'll be working with them to mow and burn and prep for some of those shows so that we can get everything kind of squared away. But yeah, for the most part, it just becomes a day of event for us once we get the airspace stuff figured out with the FAA and the Guard up front on the acts. And then after that, they do most of the planning. So.
You want me to do a flyby on my Cub?
Yes, we definitely want that.
Slow flight. Slow flight.
Oh,
yeah.
Slow flight is
What
high
else?
speed in the Cub.
You drop balloons.
Casey, do you have any updates from the Guard standpoint? Who's the POC over there?
They've got a whole team. I think it's Colonel Lincoln, got Lieutenant Ben Webb in the ops group. We have a little bit of involvement. We'll be dropping some guys with the C-130.
Nice.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, so we've got a little bit of involvement. The static displays, they've got a really big list of everywhere from a Cub to a C-17 potentially, some F-15s. It's a pretty good lineup for the display, and of course the fun goods. So should be a good show.
Okay. And I want to welcome our City Commissioner, Susan Wolf. Thanks for coming. If you have any comments from the city, feel free to jump in at any time. We appreciate it. All right, with that, we'll get into the business. As always, remember any agenda items that present a conflict of interest and consequently require a member to abstain from the discussion or vote, please do say so as we get to that portion. Let's start off with number 1, acceptance bid for the de-ice pads and update budget.
Yeah, so this project, you may remember, was originally bid back in 2020, 2021. And at the time that we had one bid, it was more money than we had on hand to do that project, and so we canceled that bid. We worked with the FAA over the last, well, really the last full year practically at this point, to try and find some additional dollars for this. It's primarily a discretionary grant project, which which means it's added money we have to compete for, but it's money we don't receive via a formula. So the FAA was able to keep our grant from last year, which was really terrific because that was 100% grant. All of the airport grants in 2021 were 100% grants. So they did us a big favor by preserving the original grant, which we won't have to provide a match for. They were able to secure some additional discretionary grant money that we will have to find a match for. But they've provided nearly $7.9 million in discretionary grant, which is terrific. That's probably the largest grant we've gotten since Runway 17 was redone a few years ago. So we'll have, on the financial plan, you can see almost $7.9 million in FAA discretionary. The one bid we did receive was higher than we had anticipated even still. So we were able to shift some of our entitlement grants over to that. So we have about $500,000 in entitlement grants that we're able to put over there. The entitlement grants were received based on number of passengers, so they're limited every year. But we were able to find about $500,000 there to add to the $7.9 million. That leaves us with a combined match between those two funding sources, a required match of $388,000, almost $389,000 in matching funds, for a total budget of $8.776,500 that we're asking for approval of to get the de-icing ramp in place. The FAA has confirmed with us that they have sufficient discretionary money. And so we have all of the funding in place. The grants have not been received, obviously, but the funding is scheduled. So sometime between now and I would guess middle of June, we should see that full amount of funding allocated so we can begin work.
And the big jump, obviously, from the $6 million was?
Yeah, so $6 million, that budget, of course, was done. I believe the board probably approved that in, I think it was winter of 20. I can look here, but, like we do on most of our projects, we hold the original engineer's estimate until we have firm numbers. So in the last year or two, I think that budget actually goes all the way back to the winter of 20 when we did the initial engineer's estimate. Obviously, everything has escalated in that time period, labor costs in particular, but then on top of that, materials costs are more expensive than they were. When we got the one bid last year, we had told the FAA at the time, look, we anticipate bids, for a while now. We're not going to go back, and indeed they haven't with the bids we've gotten this year to something much lower. And so, we had signaled to the FAA last year, look, we're going to need more money. This isn't going to be a $6 million project, and they were able to secure that additional money. So yeah, the $6 million was the original engineer's estimate back right at the onset of COVID. And in that time, bid prices pretty much across the board, we've seen escalating. And so it is a much more expensive project now at $8.7 million. But we don't anticipate that pricing will recede much in the next year or two. The good news is, like I said, $7.9 million in discretionary. That's money that we normally won't see unless we have a competitive project. And the FAA in this current year found our project to be competitive against other things in the region. So that's the good news is we are getting an increase in the amount of funding we would normally see to help us get this project done.
Yeah, making that extra space for RON airplanes would be good.
Yeah, the de-icing, we had a number of diversions right around the holidays this year, and we're again out of room. It's really nice to have some additional space over there so we don't tie up the Romeos with the plane trying to de-ice in the morning. Because planes, as they're coming and going, that's the only way in and out of there. And if you're parked between the two to get de-iced, you're pretty much controlling the entire ramp. So this project will allow us to bypass those planes on the Romeos. Yeah. So basically we'll be paving out to here and kind of creating a bypass where you can park a plane in here and de-ice in that area and still allow planes to pass you both in and out. And then in the summertime, as you said, we can back in 3 regional jets or get 1 or 2 full-size jets in there lengthwise for overnights. And you think back to the last time we had Chicago, Denver and Chicago used the same gate and departed within 20 minutes of each other. So it would have been really convenient to have that plane so close to the ramp so the pilot could go out pre-flight, get in the plane, drive right over to the gate as soon as the Denver flight left in the morning so he could get passengers boarded. And that's the advantage of having that infrastructure right there. I always call ramp expansions a poor man's terminal expansion because it does allow you to get quick turns in and out of the terminal complex without building additional gate space. And so increasingly as we grow, we'll see more iterations of different hub flights from the same airlines. Having extra ramp space is key because it does allow them to overnight an extra plane there and then get out at the same time. As you all know, we're equidistant to practically all of the hubs that service Montana, and so all those flights want to leave at practically the same time every morning in order to get to the bank they're trying to hit at the hub. Which means, as we get it, that's why Minneapolis and Salt Lake have always had different gates, is typically they're very close to each other in departure time. And so as we see more United flights, potentially other airlines leaving in the morning, they're all going to leave at the same time. So having that additional ramp space is really key.
Good.
It's my understanding that Pullman Aviation provides the de-icing service. Does the airport get any revenue from that at all? We just provide the collection facility and everything and don't get
Yeah.
anything in return?
Yeah, and that's a fairly typical, particularly at smaller airports. And I think Denver might actually run their own de-icing. I don't know, Dwight, is that?
I don't know.
Yeah, some of the big airports I think probably do their own de-icing, but typically at a Colorado Springs, even kind of small, medium hub size, it's the FBO or the ground handling company that would be doing the de-icing. Sometimes the airlines will de-ice them themselves, yeah, then we end up with the effluent and have to do something with it.
This is an evaporation system, right?
Yeah, so everything, and it really won't change much. So, I mean, that's the fortunate thing when I started looking at this, I was realizing, wow, this is set up pretty well for what we want to do, because here's the pipe that currently has, it's a grate. This is non-airline stressed pavement today. And so essentially as you de-ice here, that effluent makes its way over to this trench drain and then comes out to these kind of brackish ponds over here where it evaporates out. These are rubber lined with a black liner to help evaporate. So typically, I haven't looked at them today, but if you were out there July or August, they'd be almost completely empty because all that winter effluent has evaporated out, which is the best environmental way to deal with that effluent. And in climates like ours, we have very low humidity. It's possible. If you go to an Albany, New York, they actually have a bubble system where it constantly triturates that to try and get it to evaporate. Fortunately, out west, where it's dry enough, it'll evaporate pretty readily just in a lined pond. And so what we'll be able to do is harden this for aircraft movement, basically keep the same trench drain where it is, and then all that effluent will just go over to the existing ponds. So it's more about increasing circulation really than it is dealing with the de-icing effluent. We have plenty of capacity in the current system, but we can actually kind of come over here and use the exact same infrastructure to deal with that effluent and provide more capacity on the terminal ramp.
But basically provided for the fees from them.
Right. Okay. And the other thing this will do too is more or less now it's almost a drive-through system. Remember when you put on that type 2 glycol, you only have about 20 minutes by the time it's done being applied to get that plane out of there because it needs to be applied and then you need to get your airplane to start doing the wing heat itself, and so you're limited on time. So the faster we can make it, so that they're not waiting on somebody who's pulled back here to get out. The faster we can make it to get them to the runway, the better chance they don't have to get de-iced again because then they got to pay again, which is more costly.
It's called holdover time, and depending on the level of precipitation, the harder it's snowing, the less holdover time you have. So if it's a heavy snow, you might only have 20 minutes. If it's a light snow, you might have an hour. So it just depends on how hard it's snowing. And then the FedEx pad won't change. It goes into an underground storage tank.
Yeah, so today the FedEx has a similar trench drain, and that trench drain goes to a vault. Several years ago, the city indicated they no longer wanted us to release from that vault into their system because it causes some problems with their chemistry further down into that neighborhood there in terms of, I think pH was the primary problem, but probably also bio-oxygen degradation in the effluent. And so in order to release that pond, we would have to do a lot of chemical treating to it. Probably add fly ash with a couple other chemicals, percolate it, try to get to the box that they wanted us to fit in. It's not practical because that particular vault takes on so much storm water because there isn't an evaporation component. and the entire ramp goes to the slot drain. So we can't discern glycol from non-glycol in that system very well. So if you looked in our capital improvement program 3 or 4 years down the road, we plan to pull that vault out and build some evaporation ponds kind of in that same vicinity. So we plan to come over here and build some evaporation ponds out in this area here, potentially out in here, so that that vault can be pulled out. The vault's right there. And we can drain it to a pond, line the pond, and do the same thing. So that's our plan long term, to take care of that. Right now, we're having to actually pump that into a container and take it over to our existing ponds. So we're doing a lot of manual work, which isn't great.
We have to do that very often?
Yeah, it's done all winter. So several times in winter that vault fills up and we have to transport it over there. So here in a couple of years, the FedEx agreement actually has has not only rent, it has a capital component. We're going to be deferring some of the revenue and creating a reserve account that will fund that ramp replacement. And so in talking to FedEx, it's one of the things that we said to them is, you guys, if you wanted the ice on our ramp, we're going to have more capacity. You could do it here. But because of their operation being so rapid fire, that's too much of an impediment to them. So they still want to do the icing over there. So we said, well, in that case, we'll pull out that slot drain because the drain itself is starting to fail, which is not uncommon. Typically, the pavement around that ramp is one small panel, or around that slot drain is one small panel, and then the pipe's in there, and that'll settle at a different rate than the pavement around it. And then your plow blade starts getting it and popping up the concrete. And so, that's the typical way these fail in the end. I've seen it many, many times. That's why I like the ramp edge situation better. So we'll be replacing that slot drain and then building a new pond, and that will be funded through the FedEx lease through an annual fee that they'll be paying to help us replace that infrastructure.
Good. All right, so getting back to our primary one of the de-ice pad bid and updated budget. Do I have a motion to authorize the airport director to construct the de-icing ramp project for a budget not to exceed $8,776,500 and to accept the grants amount indicated above? Second?
I'll second it.
Good motion and a second. Do we have any further discussion on the de-icing pad? All right, no further discussion. All in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay? Motion passes. Thank you. All right, on to number 2, bid acceptance of the SR equipment acquisition.
Yes, so we've been looking to do this project for a couple of years. You're probably familiar. We've kept it out in front of the FAA now for about 4 or 5 years. About 5 years ago, the FAA came out with new snow guidance to a standard that's called no worse than wet. And prior to that, you would find some airports that might just simply sand snow and land on a modified runway with sanded snow. From a friction perspective, you can maintain friction pretty readily in some conditions of snow by just additives like that. But because of some accidents, and particularly that one in Chicago a few years back, the FAA decided to modify their standards for care of the runway to a standard of no worse than wet. So in other words, we have to get that runway down to what it would be like in a rainstorm, more or less. Because of that, airports found that they didn't have enough equipment, us included. When I got here 10 years ago, we didn't have the ability to apply any kind of chemical to the runway. And so when we began to set up and see declining the icing conditions and friction dropping, we had very few tools other than sand to preserve that friction and land planes safely. Over the 10 years I've been here, we've made pretty massive investments in snow equipment, 3 pole behind brooms, a new ramp hog. We acquired 2 blowers from the Guard that were used but very low hours. They're 1990s models, but they have very low hours. And we've been operating at a higher capacity. We also went out and got equipment to do de-icing chemical. And so now we can apply both NAC, which is the crystallized or pelletized de-icing chemical, and also liquid de-icer. in order to preserve our friction. And we only use that primarily when we're in a condition where the ground might be right at the freezing temperature. If it's really cold, our brooms do a great job of getting the pavement clear. And if it's warm enough that it melts on the surface, then all we have to do is monitor surface temperature to make sure it doesn't start to freeze. It's in that transitional period where the surface of the ground is starting to go to a freeze cycle that you have to stay in front of. And one of the ways you do that's with chemical. That's exceptionally expensive. It's thousands of dollars, like $8,000 every time we apply it. And so we do it sparingly. And so what all the airports, including us, found is we simply needed more equipment to really to maintain the runway to the standard the FAA wants us to maintain it to now. And so shortly after receiving that new guidance, we turned around to the FAA and said, look, if this is a priority, and we agree that it is, then we need to increase the amount of funding that you're providing for snow equipment. They wrestled with it for a couple years, and they actually did increase the scoring of snow equipment in the national guidance a little bit, so that airports can acquire snow equipment using FAA money. After 4 or 5 years on the list, we've received a discretionary grant to fund this snow blower. This is the last major piece of equipment we haven't replaced. It's also one of the most expensive pieces we acquire. We currently do have 2 used models, but this will provide much more capability than what we have now, and will allow us to have some spares, which we desperately need. Every storm we break something, which is the nature of the game. And so this piece of equipment will cost about $750,000. I went down to the state a few months ago, and with that new gas tax they have on all the commercial airlines, they have a little bit of money, and so we asked MDT if we could get a grant to help match this piece of equipment, and they did allow for that. And so they provided up to $90,000 in match for our snow blower, so we'll actually be able to acquire this for free to the authority anyway. I mean, obviously it costs money, but that's a tremendous leap forward for us in our snow capability. And so we'd like the board's approval to acquire this piece of snow equipment. We have, I think, 4 bids total, isn't that right, Chris? 3 bids total. We're still ferreting through the bids. We got 500,000 bids last week, I think, and so we're still going through each one of them for compliance. So I can't tell you exactly which vendor is low bid yet. We want to make sure everything's compliant. But the budget should hold at $750,000 of federal total, and with the match actually coming from a state grant of $75,000. So there's no local funding, but a total acquisition price of $750,000 will be adequate.
The updated funding column doesn't make sense.
What's that?
There's missing money.
I think it's because it's
Oh, I
not
see. I didn't
available
put-
this year, so they're.
Yeah, you're right. The column got deleted there. That should be the discretionary.
675.
There's a number missing there.
So there's,
So other funds should be 675?
Yeah,
No,
Discretionary.
the AIP discretionary should be
Should be
670.
650?
Yeah,
675.
675.
675.
Yeah,
Okay.
and then 75,000 local.
Okay.
John, so what made the cost go down from 2019 to 2022?
We just got good bids. We ended up with 3 bids. I mean, often you might get 1 or 2 bids. I can't really say anything particular. Can you, Chris? I mean, when you're only, most of the bigger airports acquire like 5 of these at a time. The majority of the orders, are huge orders, so it's always hard for us to triangulate. Well, if you only get 1 of them, how much more expensive is that going to be than getting 5? My guess is we just caught them at a time when they don't have a lot of advanced orders right now. Because typically you can't get these, the federal money doesn't come through to get one of these. So it's kind of an off-cycle acquisition would be my guess. So we just caught them at a time when they might need some work this summer would be my guess.
So what would be delivered then by next fall?
Do you remember I think it's September.
September 25th?
Yeah, so almost October.
So that, like in your paragraph there where you talk about if discretionary funds aren't available for this year, then we would use next year's or, I guess, the EIP.
This year, they are going to be available.
Oh,
FAA has confirmed to us when we got these bids last week.
Okay,
they
so
have
that's
the
just,
money for this.
so we're okay on that.
Yeah, so we're good to go. And the state money, they told us that we'll have the
Yeah.
local match too. So I think we have the full funding for this one.
and have we authorized previously for this at a higher value, or?
Yeah, so the board has actually already approved that 21721. So the board approved 875. The main difference that we're doing here is we're changing the funding sources. So the AIP discretionary, you've already authorized that portion, but now we're going to accept and use a state grant rather than our own money.
Okay.
That's the
So
main
that's why
reason.
we need a report.
Ordinarily, we wouldn't bring this back to the board because we changed the funding plan. Before we said we were going to come out of pocket for, $87,000. We're now not going to come out of pocket. Instead, we'll be accepting a state grant for $75,000 or whatever the 10% local match ends up being.
Oh, good. Do I have a motion?
I'll make a motion
Okay, would you
to
like me to
update the budget, to adjust, accept the state match of 75,000 and then lowering our AIP discretionary to 675.
Okay, with that motion, and do I have a second?
I'll second.
All right, have a motion and then a second. Do I have any further discussion? All right, with no further discussion, all in favor of accepting the SRE equipment acquisition as discussed, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Mission acceptance approved. Number 3 is Southwest GA taxi line.
Yeah, so this is the project that extends what we used to call the Red Horse taxi lane down near the Eagle Jet hangar. It extends it out towards the frontage road. The original taxi lanes were part of the Red Horse project about 6 years ago, where we extended the taxi lane that used to go in front of what we call the Front Range at the time, now Great Falls Jet Center. We extended that further south, and then we built a brand new taxiway stub off of taxiway A to kind of go in right at the end of that taxiway expansion. And so this map, which is older than that project, basically today, this taxiway extends where this road used to be, and we have a new inlet that goes right next to Eagle Jet. Once Eagle Jet indicated they were coming in, we did a project a few years ago to widen the Red Horse taxiways in order to allow Group 3 aircraft, and that 737 hangar there can accommodate much larger airplanes than we had ever planned on accommodating that area. There remains a stub down there that we intend to extend all the way up to the frontage road in order to provide more hangar development opportunities. There's an entire courtyard of hangar development, about a 20-acre area of GA that we've been opening up through utility development, road development, taxiway development over the last few years. And this is the last big component of that expansion in order to provide the taxi lane access to those hangar pads. Unusual for us, we've had good hangar demand the last couple of years, and currently as it sits right now, we have two people interested in building hangars down along the flight line that exists today. We have 2 small hangars that they want to build. There's taxi lane access for those. There's also interest in T hangars up near the road. They'll be in the last pad up here. We have 2 developers that are teaming up to build some T hangars down in that area. So we'll need to extend that taxiway to allow that. And then we have one party interested in kind of an 80 by 110, and that kind of where we're at. 80 by 120, somewhere in there. So we'll need that taxiway extension to allow that. And so for us, this is like a bumper crop of hangar interest. Unfortunately, as you probably know, metal buildings are kind of hard to come by right now. So hopefully some of those hangars will get underway this year. But it looks like it's at least 6, maybe 9 months to get the metal for the hangars. So we're in the meantime trying to get the taxi lane built. This budget is based on the remainder of our federal dollars that we have for the year from entitlements. As you can see over on the second page, the total cost is about $1.45 million, which consists of the remainder of our entitlements, $1.3 million. We have to match that with a local 10%. The local 10% comes from our share, and then the state also provided us $27,000 to go towards taxi lane improvements down in that area to help with our match. And so as it sits right now, we received 1 bid for the project. The bid is well outside of our budget that we have today. We're still working with the contractor to try and get that within budget, to see what we can do to lower the cost of the project and see if we can negotiate it within that budget. This project originally, we thought the budget would be a little lower than that when we first put it together a few years ago. This represents kind of maximum funding. This is as much as we can pull together for this one. So We'd ask the board's approval for a $1.45 million project with the funding plan that you see here.
Okay. Can I have a motion to authorize the airport director to spend up to $1.45 million to fund the extension of the Southwest GA taxiway, with the approximate 90% funded from AIP and the matching Montana Aeronautics $27,000 will have the rest of that funding of approximately $117,500.
I won't make that motion.
Perfect. And a second.
I'll second it.
And a second. Any further discussion?
So, John, you have a bid that's way above your budget. What are you gonna do if you can't get close? Are we gonna scrap the project? Are we gonna do part of it? What's the fallback plan?
When we receive one bid, we're allowed to negotiate that bid. If we receive multiple bids, your hands are kind of tied, but if you get one bid, you can negotiate. So we'll try our best to see what we can take out of there. Like for instance, this morning, I sat down with Ryan and we kind of came up with a different gate usage plan that would reduce the number, the need for a flagger. We'll go out and barricade off with physical barricades, barricade off some of the other access in that area, prevent somebody else from driving through, which would allow them to leave one of the other gates open that they can see from the construction sites. So that's an example. You know, when you have a full-time gate person out there for an entire summer, anytime you're working, you know, that's going to be tens of thousands of dollars. And so, you know, those are the kinds of things that, you know, we can, you know, pull out. Or for instance, Ryan, I was talking to him this morning about doing their own painting. You know, if we painted it might save $10,000, something like that. So we'll work to negotiate it back. If we can't get it back, then the only two options you really have left are we can scuttle the project for the year, try again next year in hopes that oil might come back, you know, into the stratosphere, or we could rebid. That's the only other option you really have at this point would be, you know, to try and throw it out again to see, you know, if there's something we can do. And when we rebid, we might do something to reduce the scope of the project some, you know, cut back, you know, the amount of paving, or try to redesign the cross section. We're limited somewhat because it's federal money, so we have to build to a federal standard. But you know, we could look at some ways to try and make it less expensive to build it. And so those are really the only two options we have.
Okay, thank you.
And the potential for losing the AIP funds if we don't have.
So those are entitlement funds, so we can't really lose them. Those are based on the number of passengers we have. So we can't increase them because, you know, it's based on our passengers in 2019 this year. But we can't lose them either. So what might ultimately happen is the FAA would say, hey, you're not going to use that, right? And you know, we might say, sure. And so they would loan that to another airport that has a big project out there, and then we would get it back next year. But ultimately, we will get it back because it's entitlement funding. And that's part of the reason we've reshuffled. You know, the FAA has timelines for when they want everything done. And so we're going to use bill money for this. But then given the bill is a bipartisan infrastructure, I don't know what the L stands for, but bipartisan infrastructure bill. But given the timelines that the FAA wanted us to meet and the fact that we were doing this discretionary money for other projects, we reshuffled and used entitlements for this one because it's airfield paving is always a high priority. So the FAA wants to see us using our high priority projects for our high priority money. That's why we're shifting this over to entitlements, but we won't lose that funding if we can't award the project. It'll come back.
Okay. Any further discussion? Okay, no further discussion. All in favor of accepting the Southwest GA taxiway bid as discussed, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Nay? No nays? It passes. All right, on to the light industrial package number 2, site grading and paving.
Yes, so this is the continuation of the work over at the condominium warehouses. You may recall last winter we bored under the frontage road to place a casing in order to allow us to extend the utilities into that area. We need to basically build all the utilities in that area. It doesn't have anything today. And so a couple, over a year ago now, I guess it was, the city approved our TIF district application to have that area reimbursed from our TIF district up here on the hill once we complete the work. We think the budget for the construction work is probably around $870,000 now to complete all the utility extensions and the grading package. Last month, we approved the utility work, and this month we've got to complete the, or accept the grading work bids for the project. And as I said, I think it's going to be a total of $870,000. Once we get to completion on that and the city has accepted the utilities, we can go back to the city and apply for reimbursement from the TIF district on that. It looks like, based on the collections in that TIF district, we can support the full bond cost for the project of about a little over $1 million. And that should be enough to repay us for the utility work and the roadway that we have to build over there to service that area. Once we get the utilities accepted, we'll file an application to amend the TIF district and apply the actual costs rather than the budget costs we had to ask for a couple years ago. I think ultimately the city only approved a couple years ago, based on our engineer's estimate, about $763,000. So we'll have to go back no matter what to ask for more money. I think there's a good chance the city would approve that. They see escalation on everything like we do. But if the board approves this, this will get us going on that, the utility and grading work for the condos right away. And we're finalizing the agreement with Dick Anderson right now. They've just started producing some cost estimates for the buildings. I think we'll likely come back to the board next month to ask for approval to build the first couple units in the condo park, which we would own initially and look to lease or sell. And so obviously the metal building has gone up considerably than what we thought it would be a couple years ago, but we still think there's a need for these projects in town. And we still have warehouse needs that the airport needs. So if we get stuck with the first couple of units, we'll move our things into them and occupy those units until the market conditions improve. In the meantime, we have a number of parties interested in the remainders of the buildings we have down at this end of the airfield. We basically have one half of what we used to call the lower shop that we still occupy, and we have two companies interested in that. We also have some warehouses that are not conditioned over on the other end of the airfield that are inherited Quonset huts. They're very, very old. And we can clean those out and use some of that storage over here for that. And also, as we build our spares for the next few years until the third phase of the SRE building, which is about, I think, 3 years away in our capital program, our spare snow equipment will be rehoused into this facility as we move it out of our main snow shed until we can build the future phase of the SRE. So our plan would be to come back to the board next month. Looks like it would be a couple $1 million to build the first few units in there in the condo complex, but we're hoping to get that done before the end of next summer, so we can go out and bond these TIF proceeds to repay ourselves for the utility investment in the condo development.
So we are paying for the full infrastructure, the paving and utilities below it to build and we're also paying for and buying the first 2 units?
First 2 units, yeah, that's been the plan. We have someone else interested in the 3rd unit, so we'll be talking to them about whether or not they want to buy that 3rd unit. There's also a few other people that have contacted either us or Dick Anderson that have interest in those units too, so in buying those units. So by the time we get to building, we might have 3 or 4 units that we want to build in that first phase. We'll have to see, but yeah, now that we have pricing, we can kind of start talking to some of these potential buyers about their interest in owning one of the units.
And is Dick Anderson building any of their own units separately?
Not that we know of. They had initially indicated that they wanted to build a couple in the first phase, but I think right now they're so busy with everything else they kind of put that on hold, and that's where we've kind of left it, isn't it, Laura? That we would kind of get things going with the first couple units in that development. And the idea really would be to pre-sell them anyway. I mean, we we don't see it as a, we want it to be built to suit, right? I mean, we want to build it to what the company wants rather than us just building shell and leasing it or selling it. As this gets up and running, the idea is to pre-sell so that people can get the amenities in that development they want.
Have you marketed it much yet?
Not yet, no. We didn't, marketing without a price is, a few people in Great Falls have that luxury, right?
What we call a pipe dream? Has there been any discussion with Dick Anderson about alternative materials, metal?
Yeah, their pricing tilt up along with metal building. And so they've been looking at both those models.
Okay. Can I have a motion to accept the airport director's request to authorize and proceed with the light industrial condo infrastructure development of utility and groundwork of a budget not to exceed $870,000?
Make a motion to state it.
And second?
I'll second.
I have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All right, no further discussion. All in favor of the motion as previously stated, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay? Motion passes. And last but not least, the general contractor, construction manager, at-risk RFP recommendation.
Yes, this is the terminal ticketing project. Is the first project out of the gate under this GC at risk model that we intend to pursue for the terminal. We have a number of projects over the next 4 or 5 years that if this relationship is working out well, we would extend this relationship to take on those projects. We think this is a good way of contracting these as we look at the escalation environment and the labor environment. Having a contractor involved in the design process on these ticket counter expansions makes a lot of sense. There's a tremendous amount of detail work. I mean, even just the electrical room, having contractor input on what they think they could get in terms of switchgear and electrical components would be key. Some items are back ordered like 9 months. And so if that's a difference between your architect specing, Siemens board versus, another brand of board, that could be really key in getting this project successfully built. And so we really think there's a lot of advantages of bringing in the contractor up front through this model. As you recall, we asked a month or two ago for a couple board members to serve on the interview panel for the GCs that we had apply. We ended up with 4 different companies that provided proposals, and we interviewed all 4 of them. And it was an incredibly good exercise, I thought. I think all 4 companies presented very good qualifications and knowledge. But in the end, the committee unanimously decided to select Dick Anderson Construction to partner with on this project. And so I open the floor if anyone wanted to, that was on the panel, wanted to just express their thoughts on how that process went. But I thought it was a terrific exercise, and I'm really looking forward to moving through this process with Dick Anderson.
Tony, any thoughts?
Yeah, it was very educational for me. Again, I've never done anything like that, but the written proposal was very widely in quality going into the interviews. But the interviews were interesting. I think they all could have done the job at some level. And we had a great discussion. Came to light that the biggest issue in this is supply chain, what everybody's going to be, especially electrical panels, believe it or not. And so in the end,
do they have semiconductors in them?
No, it's just that there's only, I think, 1 or 2 companies that make them.
Oh, okay.
And there's almost a year lead to get them. And the company that seemed to understand the issues, the budget, schedule, everything, and gave the best confidence and ability to work with the team. That was an important variable, working with the team to solve problems and deal with issues in real time to make sure we get this done on time and within budget. In the end, I think after a great conversation among the committee, Dick Anderson came out on top, and I think everybody felt that way. It was interesting discussion. I mean, but in the end, I think it was unanimous.
Rich, any thoughts?
I just echo what Tony said. It was very informative, very much so, and they were all good presentations. I mean, you know, like what he says, some of the written proposals, they varied significantly, but when it came to the actual presentation, they were all very good. But for many of the same reasons that Tony had mentioned, we had really good discussions and amongst all of us, and leaned the direction that we did in the end. So.
And it sounds like a large part of the discussion was also on do they have the time and energy to put into our projects?
Huge problem, yeah.
That was key, you know, and the desire. And I go back to, you know, Dick Anderson that we selected, they took the initiative to actually start thinking through the process, where the others were kind of hit and miss with, we're going to do this and do this, but they really hadn't put a lot of thought into it. So.
Yeah, they were impressive. They came out and did a pre-visit and really understood the project and presented some ideas that actually got feedback it wasn't going to work. And they in real time displayed how they were going to work with the team to come up with different ideas, and I think that was sort of the key.
And when you say team, who are we talking about?
So the design team will be these guys, and you can see in here, we were basically at 50% design right now.
Okay.
And so they'll get a full set of the plans, I mean, full CAD level set of plans, and then they'll provide their feedback into the design process, which will be integrated as we move to 100% design. So we've got basically, you know, schematic design right now where we are starting to look at what, you know, utilities need to go where, and we know where the walls are roughly going, you know, that kind of thing. They'll be integrated into that process to say, you know what, you shouldn't use brick on the back of the building because, you know, the brick is back ordered, you know, in that color for the next 5 years. If you use cement block, however, you know, that we can get next week. You know, so I mean, that's the kind of feedback we'll be getting directly into the project design at this level. And so they're going to charge us about $18,000 to provide that input during design, and then we'll begin cutting basically work orders off of that contract so that they can start on elements of the project from there. So that design team will integrate the construction manager at risk, you know, integrate the engineer, which is Morrison and Maryland on this project, and then the architect, which is we have a local architect, which is LPW downtown, and then they're integrated with RS&H, who provides the industry expertise. As a terminal architect, a pretty noteworthy terminal architect who, you know, knows things like ticket counter and airline IT and that kind of thing. So, I mean, and then of course the airport staff, which will be integrated into those decisions too, you know, on, you know, what type of flooring do we want to maintain the next 20 years? You know, what type of bag belt height are we looking for? You know, something that's, you know, that we can easily maintain, that's not hard to get to, but at the same time provides ergonomics for the people trying to use it. And so all of that feedback goes together as we complete the design, and then we begin cutting work orders off of that larger project here at the end of that process.
Another key issue that came up is they were highly confident that they'd have the same team on their end to get it through the project. And that wasn't necessarily the case for one of the other companies.
So the 18,000 is just for the integration with the design team and the engineering.
Right, so we'll be paying for their project management team to come to the meetings and review the plans and make those final design decisions as we move towards, you know, actual work.
Okay. And then we'll have separate budgets come in to provide along the process.
Right.
All right.
So are we still sending the project out for bid?
No.
So we're in essence picking Dick Anderson to do all the construction work?
For the ticket counter project, yeah. But if we don't feel like we're getting good prices, we can bid, you know, we could go directly out and bid the electrical stuff if we don't like the way they did the electrical work, or if we think we could do, you know, a better, if a package was too overpriced, we can always go out and bid that independently. We're not beholden to them to do that. but they get to give us a price on it, at the onset of that process, once we've designed it.
Go ahead.
Yeah, the thing to add to that is there will be a public bid opening for the other trades, like mechanicals, plumbers, so on and so forth. Dick Anderson will be, with our team, the one who receives those bids, but they will be bid out. The trades will be bid out. And if it's a trade that Dick Anderson does, then they also submit a bid on that same one. You put the whole package together, and then that's how the bids go. So it is still, the FAA requires us to still go through a competitive bidding process publicly when it comes to the actual construction. Did that clear it up for you? Or just
we're committing to Dick as the
construction
general
manager, the general construction manager.
Okay. But the actual trades will be bid.
Yes.
So is it two entirely separate Dick Anderson teams? I mean, are they going to be pulling people from the industrial complex to come work on the ticket counter and then vice versa? Or that's just up to them how they manage that?
Currently, Josh DeVos is on the project team, kind of heads up the project team that we would have on the terminal. He also was with Guy Tobacco when they did the expansion a couple years ago at the onset of that project. He's also the main person we're working with on the warehouse project. So right now, there's a lot of commonality in the project team. They haven't really gotten down into their construction superintendent or anything on the warehouses yet. We don't know who would be working on that portion of it. But Josh has said in the interviews that he would be personally involved with the terminal work. So I do expect we'll see him over here.
Okay, good. Can I get a motion then to authorize the immediate notification of Dick Anderson Construction to be the selected contractor and provide the labor and expense ceiling not to exceed $18,000 for the at-risk RFP for the terminal improvement project?
I'll make that motion.
Do I have a second?
I'll second.
And a second. Any further discussion? Excellent. All right, with no further discussion.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Is this new in the world, or is this standard procedure at other airports?
To do an at-risk RFP?
Yeah.
Or an at-risk?
I think it's so alternative delivery systems, I think that's probably about 15 years ago, you really started seeing airports moving into that model of, all kinds of different delivery models. The construction manager at risk, I think in the last, 4 or 5 years, most of the projects that I'm aware of in our region, Northwest anyway, have kind of gone that route. Because I think part of it is just constructability. For a project like this where we have, particularly during this time, we got a lot of shortages in equipment, having that constructability feedback as part of the team is really key. Even during times when it's not like that, having someone on the design team that can say, well, appreciate what you're trying to do with the fire system, but those types of risers don't work as well as these types of risers. We have a hard time installing that and give you a better price on it if you let me use this system. It really provides that integrated feedback. And what you find sometimes is, architects can be a few years behind the trade folks in terms of what's available, best practice, what's buildable, and all those things. And that kind of ferrets itself out in these types of arrangements where you've got the contractor integrated into the process. And you guys, have no...
Currently, where Morrison Merrill's working on terminal projects and doing this exact system, the GCCM is Missoula, Billings, Bozeman. Butte was done as a alternate delivery system. Helena was also an alternate delivery system.
Reno was another big one, wasn't it, recently?
Yes, it was. Sheridan, Wyoming, Cody, those are the ones we're doing right now.
So this isn't new, we're not...
It's not brand new, but it's really become more prevalent, like John was saying, in the terminal industry in the last 10 to 15 years.
Just seems like we're paying Dick $18,000 to get an unfair advantage. I mean, just, that was my gut response, just, we're paying Dick Anderson $18,000 to have an unfair advantage.
No, we're looking for his professional opinion.
That's another way
That's
of
what we're
looking
looking
at
at.
it. So we'll go with your opinion.
Professional opinion.
But, and you're probably familiar, like I said, the prior to this, you saw like design, bid, build, there were a lot of, the last 20 years, there's been a lot of evolution in that area of incorporating a construction company in to be involved in the design process. I mean, it's really, I think, well, and I think Tony, you use it, didn't you say at UP too? It's really a lot of expanding, public infrastructure is going that way because you don't expand often, you don't have the in-house expertise to design, these things as a true construction client, right? I mean, you can't sit there and look at those junctions of the building and say, your expansion joint's wrong. I mean, you don't have that level of engineering expertise in-house. So by bringing somebody in the early stages, you ferret out a lot of those construction problems that you run into. Just like on our last terminal expansion, I mean, the couple of big problems we ran into likely could have been ferreted out through the design process. I remember the contractor saying, I can't build that expansion joint the way you've got it, we've got to change it. And then you end up with a big change order. And so, I mean, the life of public infrastructure construction, you end up with huge change orders, oftentimes through things that could have been ferreted out in the onset by having a construction person involved in the actual design. Some companies build enough that they have in-house construction engineers, right? They self-perform their construction oversight. Even a few major airports might have an in-house construction engineer whose job it is to look through the plans and say, this is buildable, this isn't buildable. But most organizations don't have that level of expertise, and so that's where this structure is really strong.
Well, I was just going to say, Sean, we used that process at Great Falls College MSU for the dental edition, and it really helped us stay on time and on budget. Because when we had supply chain issues or whatever, they all came together using their expertise to do some problem solving and to get things done. It worked really well.
Thank you.
But in a way, it is sort of a foot in the door that they all had the opportunity, and that was a motivating factor for all of them bidding on it.
I mean, as a salesman, this is exactly what I would want to do, right? I would want to position myself to have the inside line. I mean,
They all said that's why they were
exactly
motivated
what
to
I
bid
want.
on it. They all admitted that's why they were there and bidding on it. To get in
Everybody
on
had an
that
equal
problem.
opportunity. But I can easily see, like Susan said, I can easily see how they could save, I mean, we're spending $18,000, but to have that expertise there, we could save 10 times that amount of money if they find a significant glitch in the architecture / design of it, that we can make it happen easier.
Every major vertical project I've ever worked on, from looking at the AvMax plans for rebuilding a couple of those hangars over there, to that last terminal expansion, to everything else, there's been things in the design that when the construction company comes in within a few weeks, they're like, we can't do it that way, and now it's a change order. And so, I mean, by doing it, by having this up front, where they're in there involved in the solutions, you're going to ferret a lot of those change orders out before they become an impediment to schedule, right? Because, I mean, really, and Dick Anderson actually said it, but he's right, Josh said it, but, what ends up inflating your costs on a structural project like this is time, right? When you hit something and you've got to stop construction after mobility, and you're paying people, and they're not getting much done, that's where this escalation costs really go up, or if they've got to work around or something like that. And this really helps relieve that type of issue.
Yeah, the last thing that I wanted to add to the process also that they're providing for this fee is once they get the 50% plans, they will do an estimate for us at that point to give us what they think that project will cost at this time. As we get to 90%, and then finally the bid opening, they bring us along with the estimates also, so that we can make sure that come bid opening day, when we say our budget is X many $1 million, our bid comes in at X many $1 million too. So you're also getting that expertise from the contractor, actually helping you with the estimating of all your costs based on, today's labor and today's material problems and shortages that we have. So That's another big.
And to parallel the public process with the private, what you see in the private sector, Love's, for example, they have a construction company, a firm, that they work with to build their stores. Because again, Love's doesn't have the in-house expertise to build. You know, they run gas stations, and so they use, you know, the same construction company here that they use in Rockford or they use in, you know, elsewhere, and that's their version of this is, you know, hey, I've got a site, tell me what it's going to cost me to build on that site. And so they're completely outsourcing that to some contractor. Walmart did the same thing, you know, and it always really makes your local guys mad, right? You know, because like, well, they didn't do all that work, it was an out-of-town company. Well, they do that because they have an out-of-town company that they've gone through this process with and determined they're fair, I can work with them, when there's a problem, we'll be able to solve it, you know, and I can create commonality in my plans and what I get built. I'm not constantly change ordering to try and get the project done.
And you can meet your budget.
Budget and schedule, yeah. And so, I mean, the process works that way in the private sector too.
No, that's a good question. It's good learning for me too.
Okay, we've got a motion, a second, and discussion. Any further discussion? Okay, all in favor of accepting Dick Anderson Construction for the at-risk terminal improvement project, to say an aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay? No nays. The ayes have it. All right, is that all for this one? Okay, let's finish up the primary one with the Airport Board Authority comments. Commissioner Hogan.
None.
Commissioner Gibbs. Commissioner Timbo.
None.
Commissioner Arias.
I just have a question. With the city's new RV parking thing, how's our RV parking lot coming along?
we haven't gotten back to it. You know, we got to kind of wait till the ground thaws out there a little bit. But we did stockpile a whole bunch of material out there last year, you know, in order to make some enclosure walls. But we also had a conversation last week with the developer who has kind of an intriguing idea, which we may be coming back to the board with for developing that site. And so it's along the same lines, but a little bit different. I do think this summer we're going to try to get some storage area open there.
So you shoot for the summer then?
Yeah, for
Okay.
sure. But at the same time, we're also going to follow up with this developer on his idea, because I can see where that could be a pretty cool little site for what he's thinking too. So, but yeah, we've got space out there. We've started stockpiling. We know how we're going to get in and out of it. Fortunately, it's off a county road, which is good, because it's really hard for us to get permits off the MDT roads. But this is a county road, so it makes it a lot easier.
I'm just curious, I know, I've just been hearing a lot of chatter of where people want to park these things, so
So they have to get them out of their driveway?
off the street.
Off the
Off the streets right now. Put them in the driveway.
If they have space, a lot of people don't have space in their driveway.
Some
Some don't have
towns don't have
driveways.
driveways. Yeah.
All right, anything else? Commissioner Smith? Commissioner Long? All right, I have no further comments. Do we have any additional public comments? All right, with no additional public comments and no further business come before the board, I declare this meeting adjourned. We only have one item for the work session, if everybody can handle it. Shall we stick around for that? All right, let's do it. So,
Colt.
stand by for paper.
Am I passing these out? No, that's not it, all right.